Now you're welcome back, Sunday Paper Review. So I'll run you through the back pages. Naturally, you won't be surprised to see Messi's picture features in quite a few of them after last night. Messi puts Argentina back in the hunt, says Mail on Sunday. Beneath that, Southgate under fire. Pressure, says the Mail on Sunday, mounts on Gareth Southgate to explain Phil Foden's continued omission from his starting lineup. Sunday Times, again it's Messi. The magic's back. Messi celebrating after a strike. Messi strike sets up Argentina win over Mexico. Beneath that, very interesting story. I hope Wayne Pivac doesn't get the Sunday Times delivered because breakfast will be tense. Pivac on the brink as Wales eye return of Warren Gatland. We were just saying there before the ad break, Warren Gatland has been the paper over the many cracks in Welsh rugby over the last 15 years or so, and now it seems that as things hit another low point, Warren Gatland being lined up, says Stephen Thomas here, for a sensational return as Wales head coach after Wayne Pivac ended 2022 with a mere 3 wins from 12 games. So he says Wayne Pivac's job hanging by a thread after his side let slip a 21-point lead against a severely depleted Australian side. If a deal is agreed, it will initially be an interim appointment to take Wales through to the World Cup next year. It seems there was a WRU board meeting in secret last week to discuss the coaching situation after Wales lost to Georgia. And now it seems full steam ahead to approach Warren Gatland, which is just incredible. We have the front page of the Sunday Independent, Rory McIlroy up close and personal. So it's intimate portrait there of Rory McIlroy, Paul Kimmage, part 1, exclusive pages 2 to 7 inside. So that's very much taking centre stage on their front page. And then Sunday World Sport, a lot of England stories really on the back pages here. Harry's pains, so Harry Kane, the sense is from various pundits urging Gareth Southgate to rest him. So England manager Gareth Southgate urged to leave Harry Kane out of the next World Cup game, says Alan Shearer, etc. We have Mad for it. That's James Maddison up and running to give Three Lions huge boost. So he's working his way back from injury. That's the Sunday Mirror today. They also have that picture of Messi. Messi saves Argies. Then the Star, Bottle of Britain. Gareth, we won't let the side down against Wales. So they play Wales obviously next up Tuesday. England pretty much through. I think if they avoid a 4-0 defeat, they'll sail through. Wales obviously in dire straits and need to beat England and hope for favours elsewhere. And then the Sun, they have Luke back in anger. That's Luke Shaw. I'd forgotten all about this. The video of the Welsh players celebrating England losing to Iceland in 2016 has surfaced ahead of this game on Tuesday. And so Luke Shaw says, it wasn't nice.
Profound.
Strong words from Shaw. So Luke, back in anger, the headline there.
Maybe asked, was it nice?
Yes, indeed. We have a picture of Mbappe celebrating. This guy's going to be the star, isn't he? I mean, he's just uncontainable at the moment. He's electric. So Mbappe days, France 2, Denmark 1, and happy days, Lionel Messi scoring. Very happy to say we have Dion Fanning here from The Currency to my left, and Sarah O'Donovan here in studio as well. All-Ireland Camogie winner, played for Cork and Dublin. And now, a one-man operation at Naomh Marnogue, managing their Camogie team. So you're both very welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
Let's talk about the World Cup, I guess. Messi on all the front pages. So, Messi magic, for instance, the Sunday Times match report talks about Messi here on page 4. This is David Walsh, and he opens by saying, there are things that are meant to happen, things that are not meant to happen. How could Lionel Messi's World Cup be over after just 2 rounds of the group stages? The match-changing moment came almost out of nothing. Another seemingly unthreatening Argentina attack. The ball going to Di Maria, wide on the right. Di Maria had been one of his team's better performers. He saw Messi just standing outside the penalty area and in a little space. And on they go. He says of the celebration, and I think it's quite true, the outpouring afterwards, each Argentina face betrayed the strain of the occasion. Imagine you could come into a tournament with a 36-match unbeaten run as Copa America champions and then be compelled to remain at the World Cup for a fixture that for them would have no meaning if they'd been knocked out last night and had to stay on for the third game. So there was like this outpouring of relief when Messi scored. It was an atrocious game. There were fouls every 20 seconds. It was just tense right the way through, and then Messi does his thing.
I think they were embarrassed, though, going into the game, because obviously you'd heard that the Saudis had gotten Rolls Royces for beating them, 3 days previously.
I didn't hear that.
Yes.
Each?
One each. Well, they're hardly driving it around together.
God. Even the subs.
Well.
The squad game, Joe.
It sure is. I hadn't heard that.
That's one of the, I suppose, things that I had heard, and I was thinking, God, if you're Messi going into this game, and they say here they need the stakes, how could they not rise to the occasion on the evening that Messi equalled Diego Maradona's record of 21 games at the World Cup? And obviously Maradona's jersey was bought for £7 million, and it's shrouded there, and Argentina going out so early would have made a mockery of everything that had come before. So certainly the stakes were high, I will agree.
Yeah. You watched the game?
I loved it.
Ah, Dion.
I loved it. I'm sorry. I thought the first half was so astonishingly bad that it was like this is a real World Cup game.
This is important.
This is important. They're just fouls every 25 seconds. Yeah. Nothing happening. Argentina looking terrible. Like, Argentina are such a fascinating World Cup side, and that hasn't changed because of this, because the way they've celebrated this result also just shows you like how the mood swings in the team. Like, there is no stability, no consistency, no expectation.
They are the most neurotic
team around, and everything is and they come into this World Cup and everyone is saying, well, they are one of the favourites, 36 games unbeaten. And then after one game, you're like, how did these guys stay 36 games unbeaten?
There was a point in commentary where Ray Houghton just said, I don't see it. This 36-game Copa America win, I don't see it. Yeah. And it was hard to see it last night. But
having watched the Saudi Arabia game in such detail last week, I was lucky I got to watch it in work at lunch last week. The IT guys are coming into their own in our offices. They have screens up everywhere. But the intensity that Saudi played with last week, and the kind of players on the line, and last gaps, I think, was Almani with the header, off the line. And Argentina had no response to that.
Yeah, physically they were completely outdone.
Yes, and they made Saudi look really athletic and physical and intense. And as you say, they've come out with a completely different mindset this time around and battled it out.
But the different mindset was even there between the first half and the second half. Something seemed to switch almost immediately in the second half, and the substitutions helped too. But suddenly Messi was getting into those spaces. He had that run that he was fouled and hit a very tame free kick, but immediately there was this sense that he was getting into positions that he hadn't been.
Yeah, he was peripheral.
Yeah, he was totally peripheral. Yeah. And there's a really good piece by Sid Lowe in the Guardian, or I suppose it's probably in the Observer, about that, and he talked about Di Maria, and I think the Argentina players stayed in the dressing room for, as I said, an hour afterwards where they came out, and Di Maria was asked about that pass to Messi, and he said, I threw him a turd, but he always finds solution to everything. And then there's a line that Sid Lowe quotes from Jose Luis Mendelbar, who came up with this line to describe the Argentina captain. He parks better than anyone, he says. And there's an amazing clip, which I think has actually now been taken down. There was a clip going around last night of an overhead camera that just had the Mexico half at the point of Messi's goal, or in the build-up to Messi's goal. And there's an extraordinary sequence because it's all building up and it's going down the left as you're looking at it from above. And at one point, I just looked at it again. I looked at it a few times. At one point, everybody in the shot, because it's the Mexico half, everybody in the shot is moving except one person. Yeah. Everyone is moving. The referee is moving. The Mexico goalkeeper is moving. And Messi is just standing still. And he says, and Di Maria said that Messi came up to him and said, they're dropping deeper and deeper. And just wait. Yeah. And so he stopped. Everyone else kept moving and he stopped. And then Di Maria found him. And that was the difference. And then everything transformed. And it was an extraordinary, again, that insight. And it seemed to take even longer. We all know this thing about Messi and how long he used to always take 5, 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a game to kind of adjust his sort of, calibrate the opposition and calibrate the feel of it. Now maybe it's taking a whole half for him to do it.
It's interesting with the technology that's there now. You'd be surprised if there wasn't a heat map which shows his preferred positions, that the better teams or the more technically advanced teams have now said, you'll find him in this pocket predominantly, put a player there to screen him off. And if they're not, they should be. But, if that's the position that he likes to take up, then it seems to be naive not to know these things about him at this point in his career.
Yeah, they did switch off for a minute.
I think he's just so adaptable. I think that's an instructive line that he sensed they were dropping deeper, so I'll sit in the hole and wait. Whereas I suspect if they were pressing up high, he might have found another solution. I mean,
another heat map to show where he sits when that happens.
And it is an amazing thing. I was there 8 years ago at the World Cup, and I do remember it being at the Iran game where Argentina couldn't find a breakthrough, and he came up with a moment of magic, and they won the game 1-0. And Maradona was in the stand. So you spent the game watching either Messi or Maradona dictating the song of choice at a given moment. And it is quite something to watch Messi just stand. And the whole stadium is watching him. It's this weird, this kind of weird kind of atmosphere or dynamic where you're just watching him watch the game and waiting for him to do something.
That's what it's like with Ronaldo, because I was at a game in Old Trafford in January and it was the same thing. I was watching him be peripheral and wait to see his next move.
Yeah.
And that's why they've always been aligned, I think, because we do watch them.
Jonathan Northcroft was at the France game. And for me, I mean, this was just... I loved this game. This was just amazing football. Like, he pitches it perfectly, I think. He says it was a game of contrast. The Danes with their possession style against world champions, masterful at breaking from a compact shape to demolish through explosive transitions. And there was that aspect to it that Denmark kept the ball beautifully. Eriksson was doing his thing. And they weren't toothless. They created chances. And then France would get the ball and just explode. And he's this great description of France. If you didn't see the game, he said, France are like a cluster bomb, detonating from a tight grouping in the middle of the pitch into a spray of dangerous players. Mbappe flying to the left, Dembele whirling to the right, Griezmann, Rabiot, Giroud hurtling down the middle. Denmark didn't play badly in the first half, but they got to the interval happy not to have sustained damage. Such was the ferocity of the French blitzes. And then Mbappe does his thing. He calls him in this piece uncontainable, and it just does feel like that with Mbappe. So he's 23 years of age. He has scored 30 goals. This is his 6th and 7th World Cup goals last night. So that puts him in rare company. Only Pele and Mbappe have scored 7 goals before the age of 25. Like, Messi scored 8 in 21 World Cup matches. So what Mbappe is doing here is freakish, and I dare say we are going to remember this as his World Cup. I was saying to the guys in the news round, we've had a very healthy diet of Erling Haaland over the last couple of weeks and months, and really gorged on Erling Haaland, and it's been very enjoyable, and he is devastating. But I think watching even just these 2 games, I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, Mbappe is the greatest player in the world. He is the most complete, devastating player in the world. Haaland's wonderful. You can't say anything bad about him. But Mbappe is just a more complete level of frightening. Well,
Holt alludes to this because he says, perhaps it has harmed Mbappe's ability to emerge from the giant shadow cast by Messi and Ronaldo, that he's played his football in the comparative backwater of League One with PSG. But when he reaches the big stage, just as he did in Russia 4 years ago, he has a habit of bestriding it.
Like that line jumped out at me too, because he's in that backwater out of choice and out of, it's PSG. Like, it isn't, and like Messi plays for, we're looking, the 3 of the biggest stars at the World Cup play in this backwater because of the whole geopolitical aspect of football today, and the stuff we'll get to again about Qatar, and which we've talked about endlessly in the run up to this World Cup. But it is an extraordinary line to say that he's playing in a backwater when he's playing for the richest club in the world.
Champions League knockout stages, he rises up, but
he's right. Like, it is a backwater. He's completely right. And we have a different. We know Messi differently because of what he did when he was at Barcelona. And there's no doubt about it that it is a different. It is a different thing, and you suddenly do feel not quite like we've all seen enough of Mbappe. It's not quite like World Cups of old where you were suddenly seeing players that you had never seen before. But you are, it is a kind of a different stage. And I thought that the interesting thing about last night, one of the little glimpses of Messi was when Christensen was booked in the first half, and he was really lucky not to get sent off, because there were 2 Danish defenders beside him, but they weren't going to catch him either. they just happened to be. They were just providing. They were like sort of trees, kind of providing some cover for the actual foul, because Mbappe was going past them too. But the referee somehow looked at this and said, "Right,
you're covering."
Like,
even though he's made 15 yards on you in about a second. Because Didier Mann said at half time, he was like, "Well, look, you mean is the referee supposed to judge? If it was Giroud, is it a yellow, and if it's Mbappe, is it a red? That's too much to decide." No, it's not.
No.
It was clearly a red. He was. I mean, by the time he would have been 20 metres ahead of them by the time he would have shot.
Yeah. No, it was a red. It was very lucky.
There's on the Argentinian neuroticism, there is something though about like when you've got such a star player like Mbappe, or I think especially in Argentina's case with Messi, there is something, as by the way, I think Belgium have just conceded opening goal against Morocco. Yeah, they have 1-0 down at half time. There is something with the star players where even if they're not in a great position, their teammates feel like they have to give them the ball. So it was one of these interesting dynamics. And there's times where I think the better players are saying, I was obviously a decoy here, you shouldn't have given it to me. But I feel like the burden on these Argentinian players with Messi, his last World Cup, there's something going on in that camp. They've just pitched up here and they're too emotionally wrought or something.
But there's always been something going on in the camp with Messi.
That's true.
Like, this is the thing, like, it is such an illusion. And Sarah talks about Ronaldo, and like we all see Ronaldo's narcissism in full flow, and we think Messi is the
antidote.
The antidote, the lovely, humble.
Hang on, he's after taking 25 million
No, I know,
from Saudi as to be an ambassador.
Yeah,
just a nice fella. He's the boy next door.
But he's calling all the shots. Like in the aftermath of the Saudi game, all the same stuff was coming out that happened. That happened last time. Happened every World Cup. And I would say that some of that neurotic nature of Argentina is because they're trying to
do it for him.
They're trying to kind of cater to his every whim. And I also do think it's kind of interesting that they did. Part of the 36 match unbeaten run is winning the Copa America during a kind of a COVID final in front of 7,000 people, I think it was, in Brazil when it was moved from Argentina because of COVID. And it almost like the perfect conditions for somebody like Messi, who really likes to exercise his power in the shadows. It's like, he actually was able to win this tournament, finally win a major title for Argentina when there's nobody there, there's nobody around. And that's, his personality is entirely different to Maradona's, which was blunt and expressive. But yet he has got an incredible ego. He's got a huge ego, and he is like I wonder, Joe, if he's saying to him, "Don't pass to me." I'd say he thinks pass to me,
maybe not
as much as you can.
So I guess the segue there is Joe Brolly's been watching the World Cup as well, and he notes, with Messi, I was saying to the guys during the week that I was in a coffee shop, and I was two guys were ahead of me, and they were talking about the Saudi Arabia game and talking about what bets they were going to put on and how many Messi was going to score. Like, Messi's ruined himself for me. I took no joy last night watching Messi, and a part of me thinks, well, just stop being such a killjoy and enjoy the greatest player maybe of all time doing his thing at a World Cup level. But Joe Brolly is writing here, page 12 of the Sunday Independent, anchors and pundits all part of same hypocrisy. We'll come back to his core point in a moment, but later on he does talk about Lionel Messi, meanwhile, is Saudi's ambassador, signing up to a reported $25 million a year. Ever since he has been telling his almost 400 million social media followers what a wonderful place it is, which it is unless you are gay, trans, intellectual, a reformer, a woman, a social justice activist, or a journalist, in which case you are likely to become one of the disappeared, or, if you're lucky, be tortured and let go. But hey, they gave Lionel a lovely yacht, and those sunsets are amazing from the deck. The pathetic truth is that these regimes know they can buy humans. And Messi certainly did not need to be bought by anybody, but he made a choice this year to be bought by Saudi Arabia. And it's going to be interesting as they bid against Argentina for the World Cup in 2030, where his allegiances lie, because we don't know how long this deal is, but certainly there's talk of a 2030 vision as part of his relationship with Saudi Arabia. Even just in the last 2 weeks, Mohammed bin Salman has executed, or Saudi Arabia have executed 12 men in 10 days for non-violent drug offences. And this was after bin Salman had said publicly that they were going to bring down the numbers killed by sword, and they were killed by sword, where he's actually on course for a record-breaking year. And this is the country Messi for a reported 25 million, when he's making 140 to 170 a year anyway, has chosen to align himself with. So I can't watch him do his thing last night and feel joy for him.
And actually, Saudi Arabia game last week, at the final whistle, Saudi were obviously, cheering. They went to the crowds. Myself and my housemates were standing there going, is there any women in the crowd? And that was the uncomfortable part for me. And it scanned to two Western women holding Saudi flags, but I didn't see any women of Saudi Arabian descent in the crowds as well. And I was going, God, this is something else, which is a trigger for me outside of, there's a million things. But as a woman at this World Cup, it didn't feel like Saudi women being represented. And that was another thing that just geared, I was going, God, why couldn't Argentina have won this and stopped the rot,
Yeah. Where are you on Messi and this business then? To what extent does this affect his legacy?
I think it damages his legacy hugely, but I also wonder at what point, and this isn't to try and to engage in any whataboutery, what point do you decide that he's gone too far? Is when he plays for Qatari-owned PSG, or when he switches over to become an ambassador for the Vision 2030?
I feel
Saudi?
the latter.
Do you? Do you think?
I sort of think he can play for the club.
maybe
as an individual, when you pitch up and
I think
your personal brand.
I do look at him and go, how much money do you really need?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? And there is no, and like you read, and the Athletic had a very good piece about this during the week, and Ronaldo, for all his narcissism, said we don't know what reasons. Now Ronaldo might end up joining a Saudi Arabia club pretty soon. So
he's resisted their approaches.
Yeah, but they can't offer him Champions League football.
Yeah.
But anyway, he has turned down similar offers, and Messi is getting whatever he's getting, and it's 25 million a year, whatever. I know it does tarnish his legacy, and it again feeds into this sense of. But again, it feeds into this sense of what we're watching at this World Cup. And as Sarah said, the crowds, every little bit of petulance or nastiness that's reported back from the hosts, it just makes it feel a little bit. Again, just feeds into that sense that this is not a place for this tournament. And what Messi's doing, it definitely tarnishes his legacy. But again, it's, I actually shouldn't make a but there, but it is the same as Newcastle being owned by Saudi. All these things, all these elements of nation states and petrostates getting involved in football, tarnishes them.
But I wonder, is this the best thing for Ronaldo to go there? Because you see in the papers, Portugal and Ghana was practically empty. He goes there and he says, where's the adulation?
Yeah.
If I go to Saudi, am I going to have the crowds? Am I going to have the same adulation as I have in the Premiership? And maybe he decides to go to America instead. Because if he's looking for adulation at the end of a big career and he can't get Champions League football, it's not going to be found in Saudi.
Not the most virtuous reason to pass on Saudi, but you could well be right, I suspect. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back to that Joe Brolly piece. There's loads more to get through on the World Cup front, and then there's Paul Kimmage's chat with Rory McIlroy, which is full of interesting bits as well. Back in just a couple of moments. So we were just picking through the Joe Brolly piece in the Sunday Independent, and he had talked about Lionel Messi and his relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's a wider piece. He's talking really about the whole saga, and so he's talking about the 6,500 migrant workers who have died, reportedly averaging 40 cents an hour in pay. The regime has spent $229 billion. Second, by the way, in spend is Brazil, spent 19 billion. So where the 229 billion has gone, I'd suspect is an interesting question. And then talks about the Human Rights Watch documents on the various ills of the Qatari regime. I think most people fairly au fait with them at this stage. I mean, they're always still shocking to read when they're laid out fairly bluntly, like Qatar's morality police hunt gay and transgender people down. as though they were a terrorist organisation. Suspects arrested, taken to an underground torture centre in Doha. Talks about the Qatari law whereby a suspected LGBTQ plus person can be detained without charge or access to legal representation for up to 6 months. And then there's this Human Rights Watch report, which is honestly just too graphic to read out for this time on the radio. And if you've got kids in the car, I'm conscious of that as well. But I'll give the broad strokes. So a woman arrested, she was beaten, her face fractured, blindfolded, lost consciousness. When she came to, she was in a large concrete prison type building. She was forced to watch other gay and trans suspects being beaten. Another detained for 2 months in solitary confinement. Horrific things happened in solitary confinement. I'm sure you can use your imagination. Suspects only released when they sign a guarantee not to violate public morality and agree to attend conversion therapy. So Joe Brolly outlines all that, and he says Roy Keane universally applauded last week for saying the World Cup shouldn't be here. He does say, and I do agree with this, I have to say, I have felt this, Roy Keane's been talked about as though he were Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi. And he says, like the English captain Harry Kane, who bravely decided not to wear the armband after being threatened with the yellow card, Roy decided to take the money and be a good boy, he says. I agree less so on that part, I have to say. I mean, I feel there is a difference between working for instance, in this case, ITV or BBC, and working for beIN Sports, as Gary Neville is doing. I think you can draw that distinction, but I understand still where Joe Brolly comes from here. On the Roy Keane being talked about as though he were Nelson Mandela, like even the front page here of the Sunday Independent, even Brendan O'Connor's piece, Roy Keane somehow the moral compass of the world. He says, in other news, Roy Keane's become the moral compass of the world. Roy has managed to stand back and apply unflinching core clarity to the situation with statements like the World Cup shouldn't be happening in Qatar. Keane is allowed to do his punditry while still condemning the whole enterprise, because that's pretty much what everyone else is doing, which again is a point similar to Joe Brolly's. I do think there has been a halo effect on Roy Keane's comments. I mean, it's as if nobody has said boo about this World Cup, and Roy has pointed out we shouldn't be here, or the World Cup shouldn't be here, and I think it's been applauded too much.
Well, no, what I thought was interesting about it, and I hadn't until you read out that Brendan O'Connor piece, I hadn't seen anyone comparing him to Nelson Mandela or
he doesn't dare, to be fair.
No, I know, but that idea, like the moral compass of the world.
I think he's gone viral. Well, oh my God, Roy Keane finally saying it.
It went viral, but I think one of the reasons it went viral was because he didn't seem to be conflicted. He didn't seem to feel any need to justify himself being there and also say the World Cup shouldn't be there. And I don't think you need to justify that. I think you can be there because that's where the World Cup is, and it's very, and you can equally then say the World Cup shouldn't be here.
I think it's viral. Honestly, I think it's viral because it's Roy Keane. I think if Joe Cole had said exactly the same sentence, it wouldn't have gone viral. I'm being honest. I think there is a halo effect here.
That is probably part of Keane's charisma and
it's
ability.
Who's saying it, not what was said.
Yeah, but I think it was. But I do think he didn't try and dress it up in terms of I'm going to be shining a light on Qatar issues here. Like I will be doing this with great reluctance but it's important for me to offer my journalistic insight.
Sure.
He just said it shouldn't be here.
And
it was a straightforward statement.
I think also he's been doing consistently good work as a pundit over the past 3 years. And it's kind of culminated at this World Cup with him having an opinion that people go to first. And that's probably why it's getting more prominence. If he had been out of the limelight over the past 3 years, perhaps it wouldn't have taken as much store as it has. So it probably comes down to the fact that he's, really well known now because of the amount of work he's put in. So he's essentially gone from working in the office to the CEO,
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I loved when he said it. I thought it was great. But I do think there's been an overreaction, as if finally someone has said this about this World Cup. People have been saying it for a decade. Roy Keane says that we all jump up and down. Not a touch of that, no?
Maybe. I'm just trying to think, but I wonder if a lot of them, Joe does touch on the Gary Neville comments and Neville again would be the example of somebody who...
there's a hypocrisy at the heart.
And he's trying to kind of justify themselves in some way. Like you get the feeling with Roy that if they said, well, there's nothing happening here for you, he'd be like, fine, that's okay.
True.
But that is also... Yeah, he just said it shouldn't be here, lads. Yeah. It's not profound.
No.
Yeah.
It's wonderfully straightforward, and that is his great gift, I suppose.
Yes.
Paul Rowan is I guess an aspect of the any World Cup is punditry wars and who's winning, who's losing, who's up, who's down. He has a piece on Roy Keane, Paul Rowan in the Sunday Times. Can't take our eyes off you. Roy Keane is last in the course as an ITV pundit at the World Cup, and he's still speaking his mind. So it's just a piece really about Keane, and he is box office, and he's always been box office. And he says, Gary Lineker accuses him of playing up to his hard man image, but there's no evidence that Keane is faking it. If anything, he can't help himself, even if it means that his days as a football manager recede even further into the past. Where does he go to from here? On to I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here if the noise is coming from both the Keane and ITV camps are anything to go by. Like most people, Keane has his price. And Paul Rowan speculates here that a stint on I'm a Celebrity might just propel him to the status of national treasure, and he definitely has the common touch. How would Roy Keane do on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
Would he do better? Well, seeing as it seems to have rehabilitated Matt Hancock.
Has it?
Yeah, that's what I haven't watched. I watched a couple of early episodes, or a couple of bits of the early episodes, and I haven't watched it since.
What's the redeeming aspect of it?
Well, apparently he's. I'm led to believe. I sound like one of these people who watches all of it and then pretends I don't. But I read something yesterday.
Just tell us what you thought when you watched it.
I read something yesterday, Joe. I haven't been watching it as I explained.
Yeah.
That said, it again. It demonstrates the unbelievable lack of judgment of the British people, that they're now seem to have been hoodwinked by Matt Hancock on I'm a Celebrity. So,
but do we know, is he a sympathetic figure? Is he charming?
He's charming.
Is
Matt
he
Hancock?
I'm watching it.
Charming?
On the show.
Yeah.
But not in person. Not once have I wanted to pick up the phone to vote for him.
Sure.
But on the show, I've seen how he's created these relationships with the different contestants in the show, and everyone has come to we'll call it the confession box, and said, I didn't disagree with him, but he's kind of bedding in here, and he's one of the team, and he's, it's set up so that they have to win things for each other to survive or eat. Matt Hancock comes back with 7 stars, and the lads eat for the evening. He builds a rapport by bedding in.
Okay. Well, I guess, look, you don't become a politician of, I was going to say renown.
Infamy, yes.
You meet any of these people in person,
Sure.
They can charm
Yes.
the socks off you,
But if Matt was coming back with dinner every night, and the lads are starving, I can see how they can turn quickly.
Look, we've all met politicians and they make you feel like you're the only person in the room, and they're well able to do it, so I'm sure he's got certain people skills.
But I think with Roy's
Yeah.
position going into I'm a Celebrity, it would genuinely depend on who would be in alongside him and who he could bounce off of.
Because Ian Wright, I think, was cranky. But the lack of food got to him from memory. And I think he
didn't come across as
the bubbly, jovial type.
Yeah, sure. I was saying to you both that I once sat in on an interview with Roy and Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes in Cork years ago, and he sat back and he allowed the lads to tell stories about him and take the piss out of him, essentially, and really enjoyed that. So I wonder, the dynamic would have to be Mick Richards going with him to the jungle,
See, I think at heart he's a very genuinely humble, a certain shyness with the steel and the fire. I honestly do think he'd come out as a national treasure. I think everybody in the family would love him for different reasons.
So Jack Charlton to Ireland, Roy Keane to England, that kind of...
Yeah, I think...
Yeah, I think you could be right. I wonder about the relentlessness of it. Like, I do think with Keane, he likes to be able to just walk away when he's done, decompress.
Maybe.
They did say that he didn't speak about the World Cup, coming up to the World Cup, and he refused to get involved in any conversations around the human rights piece until the camera was on.
Right.
So, does that suggest that the relentlessness of 3.5 weeks in the jungle would be too much for him?
I love that we're analysing this with seriousness, by the way.
This is a line. Not that I'm doubting Paul Rowan.
Let's really get into it. How will he do in the challenges? How is he without food?
How did we go down this rabbit hole?
Yeah, I know.
Well,
Listen, I'd watch that.
Can we talk about the
what the tree?
I think it is there is a good, Paul's piece is very good on that, and I do think, I found myself, I can get ITV through my Skybox with a couple of you can't watch it straight forward.
Make the effort to get it.
Make an effort to get it.
I can't get it.
Right, but nobody wants to make an effort to do what these making an effort like that is alien to us these days. But I'm doing it for the build-up anyway, because you can't rewind bits, which is always annoying during a game. But you can, for the build-up now, I'm watching ITV, and it's far superior to the BBC and RTE. And one of the reasons, I think, especially compared to the BBC, is as they have, to a great degree, like last night I watched the build-up to the Argentina game on it, and they had Keane, Gary Neville and Joe Cole, who's very good, a very good analyst.
Yeah.
But they also they allow personalities to develop, and they allow relationships to develop. Whereas with the BBC, an awful lot of time, you don't know who is going to be on, and they do that very sort of tired thing. We must get somebody on from
the country.
Yeah. Let's get so-and-so on from, because they'll provide us with some special insight, which they don't.
Did Ian Rush on Wales, and
Ian Rush,
he's just not a natural pundit.
No, he's not a natural pundit. To digress a bit, I saw that Jurgen Klinsmann comments that enraged Iran and Carlos Queiroz was made while Ian Rush was there, and one of the tweets I saw said, how could the other pundits sit back and allow this to be said? And I really thought they were overestimating Ian Rush's abilities to be on top of these issues.
Do you know what I find as well? A part of that is, and I totally agree on having a panel, letting them develop a dynamic and relationships. All the best panels are on together routinely, and people remember, he said that last time, she said that last time, they were wrong, I can't wait to see them pulled up on it now. Or like they had Souness and Keane the next time they're on. Yeah. Can't wait to see that again. Whereas this mixing and matching, in my even limited experience, I found if people are not on with each other that often, one, it's hard to have a row in the first place. It's doubly hard to do it on television sometimes. So you're less inclined, if you're Ian Rush, for instance, to turn to Jurgen Klinsmann, who you've met for the first time potentially an hour beforehand, and spark a row with him and say, oh, that's you shouldn't have said that. I think you sit there a bit more politely. Whereas if they were on 20 more times, 30 more times together, you might turn around and go, Jurgen, come on. Yeah. So I think that's a big aspect of TV, is to get people comfortable with each other and give them a chance to develop a dynamic.
I think probably in the RT sense you'll have seen that with Sean Kavanagh and Pat Spillane, where this year particularly they seemed to go at each other, and that wouldn't have ordinarily happened because they wouldn't have, met, but they put them together, which is probably a surprise, and that they haven't worked on doing the same in the soccer sense and building those relationships that you talked about. Yeah,
I do think it's an aspect of it. And the Beeb is not doing it for you?
Not really, no. I don't think, Alan Shearer isn't a pundit I want to hear much, if anything, from. There's a number of them. And I also, this is again I'm amazed they don't have a highlights programme every evening. This is just my own little bugbear that you don't have. No, RTE do that. And RTE, it has to be said, RTE coverage is so extensive.
Yes.
Like it is phenomenal like that. They're always there.
I guess they're stretched because they do all the games, and BBC and ITV can take the afternoon off at times.
The highlights I'm enjoying with RTE at night because it's a good way of it's on between 11 and 12. It's a bit late, but it's good because you'll just get a sense of the day as well, and so maybe it's the games, not the pundits at this point. But as it goes on, they'll find their feet.
Just to wrap up on World Cup business then, as you can imagine, the papers are just awash with World Cup coverage. I thought Matt Cooper in the Business Post, brilliant angle, couldn't agree more with him, and can't be said enough. And in years to come, we'll look back on pieces like this and say, why wasn't there more of it? FIFA's dirty laundry includes a load of blatant World Cup greenwashing. So Matt Cooper here on the back page of the Business Post acknowledges there is a sports washing aspect to this World Cup, but he says greenwashing should not be overlooked either. And he says that there had been a promise that this would be a carbon neutral World Cup, that there were going to be, quote, a comprehensive set of initiatives implemented to mitigate the tournament related emissions. But it seems, as Matt Cooper says, this is about as accurate as fans being told they could drink beer at the matches in Qatar. Not only is this a carbon neutral claim a blatant falsehood, there are now suggestions that, guess what, this tournament may be the biggest single carbon contributor the world has ever experienced outside of war. The biggest emitter of carbon outside of war that the world has ever seen is what this World Cup is. Because I saw Miguel Delaney the other day just tweet, he's like, he was out for a run. Yeah. There's like an air-conditioned...
He's in an air-conditioned park.
Route across the desert. And we're all sitting there going, I'm sure that's carbon neutral. Yeah.
So, but if there's no grass in a desert, why would, not assume that it could be possibly carbon neutral?
Well, I'm coming to the grass, don't worry.
Thank you.
So, The common estimate had been that this tournament would contribute 3.5 million tonnes of carbon. However, there's a smart person at the University in England who says the true number now is 10 million tonnes as opposed to 3.5. It's now 10 million. And the biggest offenders are the so-called energy efficient stadiums, which are rarely at capacity as well. On the grass point, Matt Cooper says it gets worse. Grass seeds were flown in from North America on climate-controlled planes to allow for the construction of the pitches. 8 stadiums, 136 practice fields. They're doused with 10,000 litres of desalinated water every day in winter. In summer, it's 5 times that amount. That's 136 practice fields, all the pitches as well. And obviously all the flights in as well. Qatar has boasted 1,300 airline flights to and from the country during the World Cup. So take no notice, he concludes, of whatever environmental claims FIFA makes about this tournament. So again, the biggest carbon emitting event outside of war in the history of the planet.
Well, we shouldn't be surprised, because I was just jogged my memory when you talked about the grass seeds there. Where do the cows in Qatar come from, Joe?
Do they have many cows?
They do.
I don't know.
Australia.
Do they?
They imported their cows from Qatar or from Australia when there was during the blockade with Saudi Arabia.
Oh, over the last 5-6 years, yeah.
They flew in all their cows. We're trying to reduce our national herd. They imported their national herd.
I do think increasingly this is going to have to be a conversation around sport, because the carbon footprint is astronomical with sport. And even all these tournaments where you're flying here and flying there.
It's crazy.
The URC, even this year, when they brought in all the South African teams. I mean, I did feel like an idiot almost saying it on Monday Night Rugby, but I did raise it with, I can't remember who the pundit was. The carbon footprint here is nothing to be feeling good about, no?
Well, Formula One is a great example. All sports
could have started at a point where the stadiums were already there and grass was already there, and that would have been as good a start as any.
But they would have had to start somewhere else.
But and this is the other point. I didn't realise that Qatar had only 3 million people in the country.
Yeah,
which is Birmingham is bigger in size.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's nothing nothing sustainable about this World Cup. Exactly. The stadiums are never going to be used again.
They're barely being used at the moment.
Like I heard a story of somebody who was trying to build a hotel in Qatar for the World Cup, and whatever way the timelines was, it just turned out it couldn't get done for the World Cup. So Qatar were like, well, then we don't want it.
Right.
Because these are being built for the World Cup. And if and then the hotels, stadiums, they will all just sit there empty.
Okay.
I think it's moved on from the kind of the alcohol piece now and back to the carbon footprint piece. But with Ian Herbert today, he says he was in a coffee shop and with the locals, and he says the alcohol, was a sensitive topic, but they said we don't change our culture for 28 days. The people said no, and the Emir knew it. How? Because he speaks to all men. It is like the relationships of fathers and child. I think what he was saying there was, this was no surprise that Qatar was going to kind of bed down in this area, but everyone just ignored it.
Yeah.
Like they've ignored the carbon footprint piece.
Yeah. His Ian Herbert's piece it's one of the few across the Sunday papers. That's the last World Cup piece we'll talk about. It's one of the few that's almost a letter from Qatar. Here's what it's like out here, which I think there's definitely a place for it when it's somewhere like Qatar as opposed to a letter from France.
Well, I think it's more than a place for it. I'm amazed there isn't more of it, because I do think that there is a degree of the coverage. We talked about it here, but how much of this coverage would you be talking about? No, if we weren't in here to talk about papers, because most of the content
feels like a leading question there, rhetorical.
Well, I'm just wondering, because I watch the matches.
Yeah.
I listen to a number of podcasts.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, how much more am I going to get from an awful lot of the stuff that there's a couple of people I will read, like Miguel Delaney has written an awful lot of stuff that's useful and insightful. Ken Early is very good on stuff in the Irish Times, and this is the kind of piece, the Ian Herbert piece, then as well, that you kind of get. But it's a lot of it, like you talked about. You went through the back pages at the beginning, and it's England stuff. It's like, lads, I don't want to be that. This is all the same story.
Yeah.
You know, and it
was all Alan Shearer says they should rest Harry Kane.
Yeah, and it's like Phil Foden.
To be fair, the Luke Shaw line was explosive.
And somebody had to ask Luke Shaw what he thought about, unless Luke Shaw just brought that up, which I would be surprised.
No, I take your point.
And I think you're right. Like this stuff, the Ian Herbert piece, the insight into what it's like there is the stuff you want.
I think so too. Like I heard you mentioned Ken earlier. I heard him with Brendan O'Connor yesterday, and it was like there were amazing little tidbits. Like for instance, he was saying that beIN Sports is not RTE, BBC, ITV free to air, that it's actually very, very expensive to get the games. And so quite a few of the, well, not pubs obviously, but I suppose coffee shops and restaurants or those few, and they seem to be few and far between, those few public spaces where people can gather in that kind of a climate, aren't even showing the games. So there's times where Qatar are playing opening match or Qatar are playing a game, and there might be people at a coffee shop or a restaurant or where there might be a TV.
Oblivious.
And they're showing, I don't know, rerun of Judge Judy or whatever they show. It's because beIN Sports are charging money. So even that, but I thought that was fascinating, and maybe more of that would be good. To give you Ian Herbert's sense, well, the headline is the Plastic World Cup, so he is not a fan of the experience of week one. Like he starts by mentioning, I think you mentioned the Maradona jersey being bought for 7 million, and so he decided to pay £23 sterling to go and see the Maradona number 10 jersey from the 86 World Cup. But apparently the only way you could get into the exhibit was via a bus. The bus had broken down, and there was zero flexibility in terms of letting the other 20 people who had queued up, including, by the way, somebody, he says, a fan in a replica Ireland shirt was there, who turned to him and said, "You spent 200 billion on a tournament and you can't let us walk in to see a shirt. What kind of planet are you on?" So good that we're still there. We're around. We're moaning. As for the other takeaways from the World Cup, it's a grim picture he paints. You know, he talks about official attendance figures are just one of the fictions exploded by the deserted concourses before Wales Iran on Friday and the empty seats at Portugal Ghana. They have thrown migrant workers at everything. He said they sit in uniforms, they water the grass on places where no one walks. They stand in turquoise event team tops with huge foam fingers and megaphones blasting out pre-recorded messages. Metro this way from morning to night, often when no one is there, which is like a chilling picture. He says in a cricket stadium at Asian Town, there's an entertainment and retail complex built for immigrant workers. There's a FIFA fan zone for the people who've actually built this infrastructure, whose salaries do not remotely stretch to buying a ticket. Signs in the street in Arabic and English state, "Thanks for your contributions for delivering the best FIFA World Cup ever." He says the food stalls were open. Music was playing yesterday lunchtime for a midday start. The place was completely empty. There's lots of scenes here, just places being empty. The places where fans are arriving seem an afterthought. We're a quarter of the way through a tournament, and yet a quarter of the steel accommodation huts at a site called Free Zone have yet to be built, and there's lines about how accommodation in lots of places hasn't been finished. And he talks as well about, like, there's a coffee shop where no one's going in to buy the coffee or the £3 buns. It's not on the walk from the trains to the stadium, so it's never been good for us as a staff member. We'll be gone in 4 months. So all in all, joyless, no sense of, like, you know, public spaces being the heartbeat of a tournament, that they're coming alive in any way. And we're a week in and it's been grim. And actually, you know, week 1 and 2 from a fan perspective is the most fun because everybody's there. Doha should be a melting pot of people having a good time.
Yeah, but the reality about it is that is really not a big consideration for FIFA when they decide who's going to host a World Cup anyway.
Well, clearly not.
Certainly not in this instance.
No.
Like it's designed. We know what the Qatar World Cup was designed to do. We've seen how, you know, the executive committee have voted for it, what's been revealed about them since. But also it is designed to, you know, they don't care about what the experience of people on the ground is because it's not their experience. And then the thing you do notice over especially in recent World Cups, is that they are packaged for television in the exact same way. Like every stadium you look at here, and they're probably even more so in Qatar because the stadiums have been built for the tournament, but they're you know, there's very little identity to them. There's very little sense. You know, you're watching. The backdrop is the same wherever you are.
I feel the cameras are at precisely the same height, same distance from the pitch.
Yeah, which is a requirement. which the FIFA will be, you know, they'll have all these things as a requirement so that there is a uniformity about the presentation, and the uniformity then stretches from 2018 to 2022, and that is something, that's the stuff that matters to them. They don't care, like, you know, anyone I talk to who's there is finding it like as, you know, oppressive and just not an enjoyable experience. But again, people will say, well, in most circumstances, if you were saying, oh, I know journalists are out there and they're not enjoying it, they say, well, aren't you lucky to be there? This may be one World Cup where people are saying, well, that's interesting, rather than stop moaning.
But I think FIFA are saved by goals like Richardson's goal, which just all of the noise is stifled and smothered.
But they're also
by
saved,
that goal.
yeah. But they're also saved by the fact that most people are watching it on television for the spectacle, and the stuff, whether it's Messi, whether it's Messi's links to Saudi Arabia, all this stuff isn't really, for a huge amount of people who are watching it on television, much of an issue.
Or a consideration.
Not necessarily
not an issue, but
no, not an issue, a consideration. Yeah, and we're all guilty of that.
Yeah,
we're all like we came in here.
You're gorging on the thing like no. Have you seen your family the last week?
They come and watch some of the matches with me.
I would say, look, you know, 9 to 5. I was saying to you that the office it's set up. I was in a meeting last week. I was saying to Dion, the Germans were obviously playing, and I happened to be in a meeting with a couple of Germans, and we had a break. Japan scored the goal. I went back in and I said, it's not good news, lads, you know. And I was just getting a brief reprieve from 3 hours of meetings.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for.
Sure.
I wasn't considering the issues at that point. I was just looking for a breath of air. So
and it's totally fair as well,
yeah.
you know. It's a very natural thing. That's what sport's supposed to be.
Yeah.
We'll take a very short break. We're going to finish off the paper review. Rory McIlroy up close and personal with Paul Kimmage on the way in just 1 second. Still, by the way, 0-0 between Belgium and Morocco. Morocco did score, but it was ruled out just before half-time. Paul Kimmage once again has sat down with Rory McIlroy. They've done this twice previously, so this is number 3 now, and it's a 2-parter, so we'll get part 2 obviously next week. Being Rory is the headline, pages 2 to 7, and it covers a whole host of areas. Generally, the rule applies that if you see yourself in transcript form, you don't come across brilliantly, and Michael McCarthy and I are feeling that acutely this morning. So there's a point early on
Give us some context, Joe.
Yeah. There's always this chilling moment where you're like, why is my name there? Oh, no. Ooh. So this is after Rory recently, I think just a couple of weeks ago, called for Greg Norman to effectively exit stage left, was his choice of words. Like, he needs to be sacked, which was kind of a strong thing to say. I think Greg needs to go. This is early on in the piece. And his comments went viral, writes Paul Kimmage. They were played that night by Joe Molloy, Michael McCarthy and Newstalk's Off the Ball. Here's what happened next. And I don't know. We were obviously quite excited. Molloy, oh my God. McCarthy, that's amazing. Molloy, he drove over him, reversed back over him, and drove over him a few more times. And we go on like that for what feels like an interminable amount of time. He's not wrong, says McCarthy. I just can't believe he said it, said me. McCarthy, yeah, he's probably a bit more subtle in the past, but go Rory. And Paul says there was a split-second pause before McCarthy went again. God, I love 2022 Rory McIlroy. He's the best character in sport. So we've mastered there, I think, in the news round, the art of sounding gormless. Really love that. These things happen, I suppose.
Well, I think the last point where he says, God, I love 22 Rory McIlroy is probably the reason why we're being treated to a third interview between Paul Kimmage and Rory McIlroy.
I think, Dion, you said it does set up 2022 has been an extraordinary year in McIlroy's life, so I think that's going to be the focus of part 2. And so it's almost just a little, we're going to come back to this extraordinary year in part 2. But I almost want to just to insert. Molloy and McCarthy said afterwards, these are not their complete thoughts.
Molloy went home and wrote a 3,000 word essay on
and just say, "Oh my God," repeatedly. My God, I can't believe it. Transcript
Substack is available where you can read further, more in-depth thoughts.
Especially in the midst of like Kimmage's brilliant prose, it doesn't.
Almost like Luke Shaw, you might say.
I mean, who am I to trample on Luke Shaw? So then we get into some fascinating areas, I suppose. So this is a brief overview, and then I'm very curious to see what jumped out to you guys. And as ever with the piece this long, you have to read it really to appreciate it. But he's talking about his general personality, where he is in his life at this stage. And he just said at one point that his dad is so personable with people. He says, the one thing my dad does better than I do is small talk. I'm sure his dad is like, the one thing? But anyway, we'll let that slide. And Paul Kimmage says that he's maybe a bit more like his mother, because he was recalling saying hi to Rosie, and Paul Kimmage just says, I could sense her reserve straight away, do not disturb. And McIlroy says, yeah, my mum sits back, observes, tries to scope everything out. She's definitely a better judge of character than me or my dad, which is a very interesting line. When she trusts you, she is fiercely loyal and protective. And Paul says, I get the same vibe from Erica, who is McIlroy's wife. And he says, yeah, same thing. And he notes, and this must be a strange existence even for Erica. We'll walk into a room together, people will strike up a conversation with her, but they want to get to me. And she sees it and she understands it. And for someone in my position to have two women around me like that is great. The pests, as Sean O'Flaherty, his agent, calls them, his manager. And Rory laughs and says, yeah, there are plenty of those, and I'll bet there are. And they go on, they talk about he lives in Florida now and his neighbours are Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods and Joe Namath. This is the company he's in. And McIlroy says a very interesting thing, I think, and an insightful thing about fame. And he's talking about those guys and they're of, you know, incredible status and stature. And he says, what makes those guys so successful is they didn't get caught up in it, as in the hype. They just did their thing. One thing I've realised is that you don't create an aura or a status yourself. Other people do that for you. A narrative starts to build. People think differently of you, and that's the way it seems to me. And I think that's probably quite true. So they go on and they talk about the Open, where McIlroy finished second to Cam Smith, and he talks about the whole experience of the crowd being almost viscerally in support of him, and he talked about almost trying to block that out, to stay away from that during the tournament. Talked about the night before going out as leader. How did you sleep? Better than I thought I would. The suite was at the front, but our bedroom was tucked in behind. It was a dark room. It was lovely being able to leave the windows open at night and get the fresh air in. I woke up early, had breakfast with Poppy at 7, tried to take a nap. That's usually my routine when tea times are late, but that nap, I couldn't sleep. I was just lying there with my eyes shut. And he's very honest with himself about the Open loss, where Cam Smith came from behind and won brilliantly. And that day, McIlroy, I think, you know, it's the big regret, I suspect, of his year. He just didn't grab it enough. And Paul Kimmage mentioned speaking to Harrington. He said Victor Hovland was the undoing, because McIlroy played with Hovland. And McIlroy says, because he didn't play well. Paul Kimmage says, because you had him covered. Harrington said if you had been playing with Cam Smith, it would have been different. You know, that you would have, I suppose, have to respond to Cam Smith's charge. And McIlroy says, and I think he's absolutely right here, it's all hindsight. I feel that passing the blame onto someone else is you know, would be the Hovland theory. For me, it's very simple. There were 4 up and downs that I didn't get. That was the difference between winning the Claret Jug, not winning it. And he talked about the aftermath, which was fascinating. I went back to the hotel. Erica's parents were there, and I just put Poppy to bed. There were more hugs, more tears. I didn't see my parents until the next morning. Paul says, I saw them that night in the hotel restaurant. Rory, yeah, there were a lot of people up there that I knew, but I couldn't face it. I just couldn't. I wanted to crawl into a hole. We stayed in the hotel room, that's him and Erica, ordered some food, a bottle of wine. What did you talk about? I'm sure there was a bit of, I don't feel like I did much wrong, because at that point you start to think about things. I could have got up and down on 3, should have made birdie on 9, should have made birdie on 12. You know, all the SH1T Erica just doesn't want to hear. But I give her credit for sitting there listening to it. I'm sure we tried to watch something on TV to get away from it. That's a tough night. It's a shit night. Did you sleep? I got to sleep quickly. I think the outpouring of emotion coupled with a couple of glasses of red wine knocked me out. But I woke at 3 or 4 in the morning, and that was it. You're just lying there wide awake and thinking about it all over again. When did you see your parents? Next morning, before we headed off. It's funny, I'm always okay with my dad, but when I see my mum, I'm like, wow, floods of tears. If you're a golf fan, you'll be super interested in that period where McIlroy tried to chase Bryson DeChambeau's length. And right through that period, when I wasn't saying things like, oh my God, and we were talking about Rory. This period confused me no end. So what happened here, if you're not a golf fan, is that Bryson DeChambeau won the US Open by being slightly wild off the tee but super long, and that shouldn't happen at a US Open. And this was a moment for McIlroy where he thought, maybe I need to do that, and it was just a grave mistake, and he elaborates on that. So Kimmage says after DeChambeau wins the US Open in that fashion, now he's in your head. Rory, yeah, might have been a touch of an ego thing. There was a part of me that thought, well, I can do that too. And I started messing around. This was in September 2020. And initially, he says, he started getting distance. I was 30, 40 yards longer than my partners. You start feeling good about yourself. What you don't realise, though, is your swing is deteriorating. Paul says, was Harry saying that to you? Was he trying to, steer you away from it? Rory says, Harry has his own way. He'll never disagree with me. But he'll be like, maybe we should go and practice our wedges or our putting, Masters has played that November in 2020. He was careful, he was tentative, as he often is. And Jimmy Dunn, who's a businessman who is in the McIlroy circle, said it to him after the first round, why are you being so careful? And McIlroy went out and played much better, but he was too far back at that stage. And it's interesting with Rory, he's very much in charge of his game, of his circle. Best friend Harry on the bag, people he's very comfortable with around him, and he doesn't take advice easily. And so it seemed when Jimmy Dunn said that, McIlroy's response was, I can take it from someone like Jimmy because he's outside the circle, and I'll take it when it's inside the circle, but I'd have a much easier time telling Sean to F off than I would Jimmy Dunn. I don't have to listen to it or accept it, but I'll at least let him say it. But I think through the back end of 2020, I was just a bit lost with my game. I'd let my swing get into a place where it was unpredictable. And then 2021, finally, because I presume part 2 will be about 2022 in more depth, he expresses huge regret over Michael Bannon being his coach since he was 4, 5, 6 territory, and he moved to Pete Cowan across 2021 because his game was in such a bad place, and he feels terrible because it crept out before he could tell Michael Bannon personally. He said he felt quite ashamed about it, and it was a shite thing to do, is what he says. Kimmage says, you're not a shite person, that's not your nature. And he says, yeah, but how does it happen? And McIlroy said, well, it was a feeling of shame. I felt ashamed. I was going down this other route with Pete Cowan, didn't want to confront that part of it. And so he basically, he says, I didn't have the balls to ring Michael and say, look, this is what I'm doing. And he said it was a weird period. And things are abysmal then, and he talks at length about 2021. Like, he remembers going to Kiowa, where he had won the USPGA in 2012 brilliantly, and he rocked up in 2012 he had won it brilliantly. He rocked up in 2021. This is the tournament Phil Mickelson won, the major he won, to jog your memory, and he remembers turning to Harry and saying, wow, I don't remember this course being so hard, which Paul Kimmage says that's a light bulb moment. And Rory says, yeah, why is it so much more difficult? He says, I bunted it around, I finished 40th. And then he talks about just this bad year of bad play, and it culminated in those tears at the Ryder Cup, where he was dropped for the Saturday morning. And if you're a casual golf fan and you want to remind yourself how badly Rory was playing in 2021, watch his opening couple of holes on the Friday of the Ryder Cup, which were chronic. And I remember just thinking, I was so worried he was finished around then. And it got to the point, I remember tweeting that evening, he's going to have to be dropped. And he was dropped for Saturday. And Paul says to him, you're dropped on Saturday morning for the first time ever. Yeah. Who told you? Porrick, as in Harrington. 1-on-1, yeah. How did you feel? Honestly, probably relieved. I was relieved I didn't have to go back out and lose another match. And that's, I guess, a broad summary of McIlroy with Kimmage. So I'm curious, you two, super big golf fans, not golf fans, Rory fans, not Rory fans, what did you take from this whole thing?
You can go first, yeah.
It's great to have something like this, by the way, in the papers.
It's fantastic. I would consider myself a big McIlroy fan. I've always admired his intelligence and that ability he has to slightly remove himself from the fray and to be an observer in what is going on. And I think it's funny, like, not to go back to your exchange with Mick at the beginning, but like,
if it was too complex, I can explain what we were trying to get
I just needed some clarification on a couple of
I understand. There's probably some big words in there that you need to double check.
But when Mick says I love 2022 Rory McIlroy, is that in contrast to how people have felt about Rory McIlroy in the past? Because I think Ireland, there has been an ambivalence about certain aspects of Rory McIlroy going back to the Olympics and things like that, which I think have gone now. But I always admired his ability just to kind of be who he was and to understand who he was in all those contexts too.
He's always been headstrong and
he's always been, but also there's an underlying intelligence.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think maybe there's almost too much intelligence there at times to be a sports person, or to be a sports person to do everything that a sports person really has to do in terms of, because I think with Rory, there's a line, I may have used it on this before, there's a line in a Philip Roth book about a character, it's in American Pastoral, and there's a sports person character, and they say about him that he had no need for irony. Irony was a hitch in his swing. He's a baseball player. And McIlroy, I think, has a sense of irony. And he has a sense of, and when he talks about his aura and that stuff, he has an awareness of what is actually happening here, whereas other people
think they have an aura.
Yeah. Ronaldo thinks he has an aura. And maybe that is why Ronaldo is able to kind of do the things Ronaldo has done. And at times, McIlroy is an astonishingly successful golfer. But, when you, again, look at what was sometimes expected of him, I think he has taken a slightly different road. And part of it is because of that little bit of distance he has. So I'm a huge fan of him in that sense. Like the golf aspect of this interview to me is, I would like this, I feel simultaneous about this piece today that it's too long and too short. I want all the rest of it. I don't understand why we can't have the whole thing now, right? Like maybe that's just because I want instant gratification, but I want...
It's starting to sound like it.
But it was without getting into kind of stuff about digital and newspapers and stuff like this, I would also if this was a digital only situation thing, would you put it all online today? You might do, because there's nothing really to be gained by saying come back and read the second part next week when as you said, the opening of today's seems to be teeing up what's going to come next week. Now, if you're trying to sell newspapers, you might think people are going to come back and read the second part. I would have printed like, what's this, 7 pages? Make it 14 pages. Just go the whole lot. Like, we talked about the World Cup coverage. There's an awful lot of stuff you don't need. This is what I think a Sunday newspaper should be doing now. Just put the whole lot out there and let us read it in one go, because I want to get, like, I know maybe I'm demonstrating why it's not being done, because you'll go back and read it next week, but
I feel what you've just said there's going to be used at a board meeting, that like, look how we suck this guy, like we got them. This guy will be queuing. Well,
yeah, but I also have the memory of a goldfish, so I might have forgotten about it by next week. But what I'm saying is, I feel there's I got to the end of it and was like, actually, I want some more. Now maybe that's a good thing, but I just felt it could be there now. But equally, the stuff that's here, especially.
You like the stuff about his personality.
I like the stuff about his personality. I like stuff about his similarities to his... Like, you quoted a little bit of the stuff about his father's personality, his mother's personality, but there's a line there which... and it is actually a bit Roy Keane-like as well, when you talk about the small talk, and he says his father can walk into a room of people and just start a conversation. How are you doing? The weather's good. And I'm all for that too, and giving people time, but not to the detriment of yourself. I sometimes think, well, that's a waste of time. Why even have that conversation? Yeah. And I think anyone who struggles with small talk would be like, yeah, that's true. And it's also just an interesting insight into how he knows himself.
Yes. Sure. I thought, what an interesting insight into his wife's existence, where there were people cozying up to her, and she knows you're not even bad enough, Rory, knowing you're not really interested in me, the person, you're interested in me, the brand and the concept. How even worse to be one removed from that. You're not even interested in me. You're not even interested in my husband, really. You're just using me to get to him, the brand. You're like several layers removed from being interested in any of us. She must see them coming a mile away.
She does, and I think, he speaks here about, Paul Kimmage speaks here about seeing her standing back at the 18th after his loss to Cam. And he says, I was watching Erica as you walked from the 18th. She followed from a distance as you were doing the interviews. She stood back so you wouldn't see her. She waited, she knew what he needed. And she always knows what he needs, evidently. And, you know, he sits into the golf cart and he cries on her shoulder. And, you know, I suppose that's what a relationship is. And, you know, it's lovely to know for him that he has those relationships in his life where he gets absolute honesty, but he also feels protected. Because outside of Erica, I liked that after the loss, Paul Kimmage asks him, you know, what did people say to you? What did the inside circle say? And Harry says to him, Rory, you keep doing this and you're going to win your majors. There wasn't negativity there. He knew he didn't need it. His dad says he was all positivity and praise that morning. Great week, Rory. You're going to have plenty more chances. Keep playing the way you're playing. What does your mother say? You know, it's constantly like, is there any negativity? She says, don't beat yourself up over this. Go and enjoy some time with your family. And then he says, my dad took on 3 jobs. My mum worked night shifts. They were doing what they had to do to support their son and never complained or moaned. And Paul Kimmage says, there's a lesson there. And he says, yeah, just get on with it. And I think that's 2022 Rory.
Yeah.
Let's not wallow.
Yeah. And like again, for casual golf fans, 2022 Rory has blossomed into the player that he should be. Consistent, thereabouts in all the majors. Yeah, the Open got away from him and he'll have a lot of regrets about that, but he's so complete now as a golfer. Even Paul McGinley has said he's a more complete golfer now than he was in 2012 and 14, where it was like these flashes of inspiration and brilliance. He's now like a proper professional.
But is that what 2022 Rory McIlroy is about?
Yeah.
Is it not to do with live golf?
It's both. But it's both.
Because that's, to me, that's the thing that is...
It's live golf, but for me, I remember, the live golf stuff is fine and it's admirable, but it's also like, you know, he's not the only one. He's become the de facto leader, to be fair, of almost the PGA Tour when it comes to speaking out against it. But for me, 2022, if you were to say to me, well, what will you remember of Rory's 2022? It's that he finally became the player that he promised to be for the several years before that. And he said, like, he's been great for many of the years before that. And you know, he's won FedEx Cups and European Order of Merits and competed, obviously. But there was just an inconsistency to his game, which was frustrating. And then particularly 2020, when he started following DeChambeau, and the whole thing went to pot across the subsequent 12 months. It was really worrying. Like he does quote a line, Paul Kimmage quotes a line of his agent, Sean, that McIlroy turned to Sean after the Open that Morikawa won, and it was to the effect that maybe I'm not as good as these guys anymore. Maybe they're all better, the younger guys, and maybe this is just where I am now. And it was starting to look like that, which seemed impossible. Like it was an impossible thought 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that Rory McIlroy's best game would not be the best, you know, better than anyone's. But you were starting to think, well, maybe he's had his golden period, and that was so shocking for a guy McIlroy's age. But he has come out over the last 18 months and just been like sensational.
But what I loved,
good.
Is Shane McIlroy obviously did that line where he says,
Larry,
Shane Larry, sorry, and he says, you just need to remember who you are. You're Rory McIlroy. You're one of the greatest players of all time, and you're not even close to being finished yet.
That was at the Ryder Cup.
Yeah,
and there was a worry he was finished. You know, there was.
But isn't it lovely that he remembers that?
Yeah.
And he says, I need reminders.
Yeah.
Because he said, you know I have the talent, but he said, I also want people to know I work hard. You know, he wants people to know how hard he works.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that he does say about when he was dropped that he felt relieved, which is a kind of an extraordinary thing for anyone to say too. And again, it's another example of that kind of honesty.
Ronan O'Gara honesty. It's like, I don't want to take that kick if we're 6 up.
Yeah.
You know, if we get
because he's transformed his wedge play, his putting, all these things that were letting him down. I don't know how he's managed to do it so brilliantly.
I'm interested that you think, like, because I do, as somebody who isn't as absorbed by golf as you, Joe, like I would see the 2022 story being as much about live,
it is.
it
is. I find I'm just a bit tired of the live stuff.
Right.
I've on Golf Weekly we've talked about it every week for like.
So you're like me now, just watching Messi going.
Let's just enjoy the football.
Just enjoy the football.
Yeah. I take the point, and live for sure has been to the fore. I think it's just because McIlroy is such an important golfer that the notion that at 32, 33 he might have been done was shocking.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And so that he has come back and come back better than ever has been like incredible. But the live stuff for sure is all the headlines.
But it's also, again, like we talked about it with Keane, and like, why does Keane get the headlines? Because he is able to articulate a point of view very simply and with great clarity. It's probably why and because it's Rory McIlroy too, but that ability to do that means he has become such a figurehead for the anti-live kind of movement, if you like.
He's fond of a change of mind though, Rory, as well, and it contradicts himself 6 months after.
Fine, that's grand. Like, that's we don't.
Always interesting.
Yeah, like I think that's that's again, that's the what's Eamon Dunphy's line. He likes the consistency as the hobgoblin of tiny minds. Like he can contradict himself. That's grand.
He's evolving. He's thinking.
Yeah, and he's thinking, and that's the thing that comes across in this, in all the stuff, is just that sense of, again, maybe at times too much. Like, when he said DeChambeau is getting into his head, like he's always thinking.
Because the scary thing with golf is he talked at one stage about how he veered off the path and maybe didn't leave himself enough breadcrumbs to get back to his brilliance. Golf is a sport where you can go down you can take a wrong turn and you mightn't find your way back. Thankfully he has, but
because he talks about that, I need to train, I should have taken 2 months off, I played too much, you played too little. He's constantly second guessing himself. Yeah.
Calibration. Part 2 next week. Dion Fanning will be at his local newsagent at 9 a.m. sure. Guys, we're so out of time. My apologies, we've gone late. But Dion Fanning of the Currency, Sarah Donovan, All-Ireland Camogie winner. Thank you both very much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Sure.
We'll take a break.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.